Okay, all right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And we're going to look in chapter 2. Now, these sections will go through quite a bit quicker than we did in chapter 1. Again, a lot of these are review. 2:1 is a quick, easy section to go through. Normally, the first section and the last section of each chapter is normally the easiest to work through. 2.1, we're going to start the beginnings of graphing. So we're going to start off with a quick review of graphing. And the first thing we're going to look at is ordered pairs. And ordered pairs always go x comma y. Okay? So again, you're probably already familiar with this. If you go on and you take a calculus course, you may work with ordered triplets, which would be x, y, and z. In this course, though, we only work in 2 dimensions. And we graph them based on the Cartesian, or coordinate system. And remember how this goes. Up and down is your y, so positive y, negative y. Left and right is your x, so positive x and negative x there. So there's our coordinate system. And we're first going to learn how to plot ordered pairs. So we're going to learn how to plot ordered pairs. Now there is a difference between plot and graph. So when I say graph, that means we connect them together. When I say plot, all I'm going to do is be plotting the point. So when we graph equations, we connect them together and we make a figure. If I say plot, that means we just plot the points. So let's just kind of review. I'm going to have you plot the points. And how about 3, -1? About -2, 3. And 0, -5. We're not going to connect these together. The key word here is plot. That means we plot the points, and we just put a dot where they belong. So if I was going to plot these ordered pairs, we'll start with our first one. We've got 3, -1, so that is over 3. Remember, that's your x, and that's your y. Down 1. So that's 3, -1. All right. Let me go ahead and pass these out real quick here. Okay, so we're just learning how to plot ordered pairs again. So if I wanted you to plot 3, -1, that means we would go forward 3 units, down 1. What about -2? +3. If I said -2, all right, so if I wanted to plot this second ordered pair, if I wanted to plot -2, +3, I would go back, because this is our 0. Zero's there. I would go back 2 and up 3. So -2, +3 would be right here. And our last point would be at 0. X is 0. Y is the -5. So that's down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that would be your point, 0, -5. So that's how you plot ordered pairs. Should be a review for most of you. Now, what about graphing a line? Let's look at a couple of these. I'm going to have you graph this line. And we're going to have you do this by completing the ordered pairs. How about 2, blank, and one more, how about blank, comma, 1. Right, so we're going to complete these ordered pairs, and we're going to graph this line. Now, when I say graph it, that means we connect them together. Now, when we go to graph a line, you'll need at least 2 points. You can have more than 2. Anybody else need the homework packet? Here you go. Okay, so when I say graph a line, you need at least 2 different points. Now, you can use fractions as well. If we end up with a fraction, we'll just look at the decimal equivalent and graph it where it belongs. So for each of these, we're going to complete our ordered pairs. So here's x and y. So let's look at our first one. Okay, our first one is going to be x equals 0. So I would plug in 0 for x. And 5 times 0, of course, is 0. So that gives you 4y equals 8. Divide by your 4. And so y equals now 2. Okay, so that's going to go there. We've got a 2 there. Now we're going to repeat the process with x equaling 2. And you may get a fraction. If you get a fraction, that's okay. When we go to graph them and plot our points, we'll just figure out where it belongs. So if it's a fraction, that's not a problem at all. If I get a 2 in for x, that's 5 times 2 plus 4y equals 8. So that's 10 plus 4y equals 8. I'll move my 10 over. So 4y equals now negative 2. Divide by your 4. And y now is going to be a minus a half, isn't it? And we could get by with just 2, but let's go ahead and get this third one. And so for the third one, I'm going to plug in 1 for y. So for my third one, I'm going to plug in 1 for y. And that's 5x plus 4 times 1. That equals 8. So that's 5x plus 4 equals 8. Move that 4 over. So 5x now equals a positive 4. Divide by your 5. And x now equals 4/5. And hopefully you should be familiar with how to do that. We're just plugging in points. So I'm giving you ordered pairs. I'm giving you part of them. You're finding the other one. So I'll give you the x part, you find the y part, and so on. Now, we need to go ahead and graph this line. This is going to be a line. And so if I want to graph a line, I begin by plotting the points. So let's go ahead now and plot these points. Just do that so we can see it. So here's our points. Yep, sorry about that. I'll leave these up here for a few more seconds. So we're going to go ahead and start plotting these points. Now, when we plot a fraction, what we will do is we will figure out the decimal equivalent, and then we'll try to put that point where it belongs. So like on the minus 1/2, that's a minus 0.5. So we'd put it in between minus 1 and 0. The 4/5 is 0.8. So we would put that between 0 and 1. Okay, move it up now. Okay, so these are our ordered pairs, and we're now going to go ahead and plot them. So when we plot them, we begin with 0, 2. So that's at 0 in the x-axis and up 2. So there's that point. We have positive 2, so that's over 2, down 1, half. So that's about right there. And they don't have to be perfect. You just kind of approximate where they go. And the last one is 4/5, which remember 4/5 is 0.8. So that's right there, up about 1. So it's right there. So that's at 4/5, 1. Now, what are we going to do? We're going to connect these together. Use a ruler or a straight edge. And they should make a straight line. If they don't make a straight line, you made a mistake. So let's go ahead and connect these together. And there is your line. So you complete the ordered pairs, plot them, and then connect them together to make your line. Now, when we work with ordered pairs, there's a couple of other things that we can do. So for the other things that we can do is we can find the midpoint and we can find the distance between two ordered pairs. So these are two formulas that we're going to be looking at. So let's go ahead and look at some of these. We're going to work with our midpoint formula first. And the midpoint formula is x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. Okay, so there's our midpoint formula. We'll do the midpoint formula first, okay, and then we will do the distance formula. Does anyone else need the homework packet? Yep. Okay, so we're now going to go ahead and look at the midpoint formula first. Now, the midpoint, when I work that out, that's going to be an ordered pair. So let's do a couple of these. And then we'll look at the distance formula. So the first thing we do, whenever we find the midpoint, the distance, or in the next section, the slope, we label our ordered pairs. So we begin by labeling our ordered pairs, x1, y1, x2, and y2. So we'll begin by labeling these. Okay, so there's our numbers that are going to go into the midpoint formula. And now let's find it. In our midpoint, we add them together and divide them by 2. And let's go ahead and fill these in. Okay, if I fill in with my numbers, what do I have here? x1, which is 3. x2, which is 7, over 2. And the y's, we have a 5, and a minus 2, over 2. And we know that 3 plus 7, well, that's a 10 over 2. And 5 minus 2, that's a 3 over 2. 10 over 2 breaks down to a 5, so that's going to be 5, 3 halves. And that is your midpoint. So the midpoint, move that up so we can see it here, the midpoint is going to be an ordered pair. So very important when you work these out, make sure you get them in the correct order. You add the x's together, divide by 2. Add the y's together, divide by 2. One more of these. And then we'll look at the distance formula. And chapter 2 is fairly easy, but there are a lot of formulas that you've got to remember. Remember, you can have notes on your exam, but I like to write the formula down multiple times so you see it over and over again. So let's do another one of these, and let's find the midpoint. About -5, 8, and 3, -7. Okay, so there's really not much to this. Let's label our ordered pairs. Always begin with that. So x1, y1, x2, y2. Always begin by labeling. Write up our formula, fill it in, and we are finished. So the midpoint is then going to be x1 plus x2 over 2, and y1 plus y2 over 2. Fill them in. And that's -5 plus 3 over 2. And 8 -7 over 2. -5 plus 3, that's a -2 over 2. And 8 -7, that's a 1 over 2. And that then condenses down to a -1, comma 1/2. And that would be your midpoint. And students generally do not struggle at all with the midpoint. Where students sometimes struggle is they struggle with the distance formula, which is what we're going to look at next. But it's really not that difficult either. So here's our distance formula. Your distance formula is the square root of x1 minus x2 quantity squared plus y1 minus y2 quantity squared. So this is going to be our distance formula. Now, when we use the distance formula, we have to remember when we square a negative, what happens to that number? When you square a negative, it becomes positive, right? Now, all the numbers, when we're finished, should be positive underneath the square root. Because if they were negative, that would come out as imaginary. And we cannot have an imaginary distance. So these always have to be positive. If you ever get them to be negative, you made a mistake. We're also going to have to break up the square roots. So let's do a couple of these. And then that'll actually finish out this section. So let's find the distance here. About 3, -2, and 5, 4. Now, sometimes these will come out to be nice whole numbers. And other times we'll have a root left over. And we also may have to break them down. So the very first thing I do is I begin by labeling x1, y1, x2, and y2. So that's what I always do with my ordered pairs. And now let's write up our formula. I use a D for distance. And that's x1 minus x2, quantity squared, plus y1 minus y2, quantity squared. Where students make a mistake, a lot of times is with the negatives. We are subtracting these. So it's x1 minus x2. So it's 3 minus 5, quantity squared. Okay. Plus y1, which is a minus 2, minus y2, which is a 4. And then we have to square, right? Okay, so that's what we're doing. Watch out for double negatives. If you have any, Remember, a double negative makes that positive. So 3 minus 5, that's a minus 2 squared. Minus 2 minus 4, that makes it a minus 6 squared. Minus 2 squared, when you square a negative, it becomes a positive 4. 6 squared is a 36. So that gives you then the square root of 40. Just like when we use the quadratic formula, we may have to break it down. And I think 40 is going to break down, right? Because 40, well, let's think about how it can break down. Has a 4 in it, so let's use a 4 and a 10, 2 and 2. So what's going to come out? Is it 2? What's left over? Square root of 10. So that is your distance. I don't want a decimal. I want it to be left as a radical there. Is everyone okay with what I did there? Just watch out for the signs. Be very, very careful with those negatives. When you square a negative, it becomes a positive. One more of these, and we'll move on to the next section. Two 1 is not much to it. It's a very, very small section, and there's not much at all. So let's do one more. Okay, let's find the distance. Okay, let's find the distance again between these 2 points. So the first thing we do is label x1, y1, x2, and y2. So that's the first thing that we do. Next, I like to write up the formula. I just get in the habit of doing that so I don't forget the formulas. So d equals now the square root of x1 minus x2 quantity squared plus y1 minus y2 quantity squared. Fill in our pieces. And let's see what we've got here. D equals now the square root of minus 3. Now watch out for a double negative. So it's minus 3 minus 8 quantity squared. And then we've got 4. Watch the double negatives again. Minus 6 quantity squared. Now, be very, very careful with those double negatives. So let's see what happened with these double negatives. When we use the double negatives, they become positive. So this here becomes a positive. And this piece is positive as well. Minus 3 plus 8. That makes it a 5. We have to square it still. 4 plus 6 makes it 10. You have to square it as well. 5 squared is 25. 10 squared is 100. Adding those together, we now get the square root of 125. And we should be able to break down the square root of 125. Sometimes you can break them down. Sometimes you may not be able to. But in this case, we can. Because 125, we'll break that up into 5 and 25. 5 and 5. So we have a perfect square of 5 coming out. And we've got a 5 left over. Bless you. So that's how you do the distance one. And again, there's not much to 2-1. It's a quick, easy section. So I think we now have finished all of 2.1. and we'll spend the rest of the class period on 2-2. And 2-2 is new to a lot of you. 2-2 is circles. So we're going to look at circles. Now, when I talk about a line, I need 2 points to graph a line, right? If I have 2 points, I can connect them together with a ruler or a straight edge. If I talk about a circle, what do I need? Well, I need a center and I need a radius. If you think of a compass, you've got to find some place to put the point of the compass, and then you can spin it around to make a circle. So when I have a circle, I need a center, which is an ordered pair, and a radius. So that's what I'm going to be needing, is a center, and I'm going to need a radius. So we'll start off just by graphing a circle. Okay, we're going to graph the circle, and let's say we have a center at -3, +2, and a radius of 2. Okay, so how do we graph the circle? Well, where we begin is we begin by plotting the center. Center is an ordered pair, so we're going to plot that ordered pair. And -3, +2, well, that's back 3, up 2. And that's right there, -3, +2. Now, what does it mean when I talk about the radius? Okay, the radius is the distance from the center to the outer edge of the circle. And when I have that 2, that means we're going to go 2 units in every direction. So we're going to start here in my center, and we're going to go up 2 units. Okay, 2 units up, 2 units back. These are all 2 units here. 2 units down, and 2 units over. 1, 2 units over. These are all 2 units from the center, and now we can connect them together and make our circle. So what I did was I plotted my center first, and then I went 2 units in each direction. So that's how we do one of those. Now let's do some more of these. Let's graph one more of these, and then we'll talk about the center radius form of a circle. So let's try to graph another circle. And we'll use a center of 1, 2. And a radius this time of 5. That way it'll be a little bit easier to see. So the center is at 1, 2, radius of 5. So where would we begin? We plot our point for the center, which is at 1, up 2, so over 1, and up 2 units. So that puts my center right there. Now, how does the radius work? Okay, the radius is 5. So that means we go 5 units in each direction from the center. So we're going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units down. We're going to go back 5 units, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That clear over here. We're going to go forward 5 units. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units forward. And then we're also going to go up 5 units. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units up. Now we've got our points. And we can connect those together and make our circle. And that's what we do. They go 5 units, in this case, in each direction. So whenever we graph a circle, we need to have a center and we need to have a radius. We have a form for circles called the center radius form. And the center radius form is x plus h, quantity squared, y plus k, quantity squared, equals r squared. And the center now is going to be minus h, minus k, and your radius is r. So this is something that's new for most of you. So you have a center radius form, okay? And from that form, when we plug in numbers, we're going to get the center of that circle and also the radius. Okay, so let's go ahead now and try one of these. So I'm going to write up an equation in center radius form. And then we're going to find the center, and we're going to find the radius of this circle. About x minus 3, quantity squared, y plus 5, quantity squared. And let's make it easy. Let's make it equal to 25. So what would the center be? Now, when we go from the center radius form to the center of this circle, we switch our signs. So that minus 3, well, that becomes a positive 3 for the x. So it's 3 there. And that positive 5 for the y becomes a negative 5. That's your center. Now your radius is not 25 because that's r squared. Your radius is the square root of 25, which is then a 5. So there's your center and your radius. So don't forget that the right-hand side is squared, so you have to take your square root. So we have a center at 3, negative 5. Switch our signs. And the radius in this case is going to be 5. Let's do another one. Okay, let's try to find the center and the radius. And how about x plus 4, quantity squared, plus y squared equals, how about 64? Okay, so what are we going to look for here? Now notice the y part. It doesn't have anything with it, so that's going to be a 0. For the x part, we switch our signs. And so what would my center now be? Well, if I switch my signs, my center is going to be minus 4 for the x part. Y part is 0. Right? There's nothing there. So we put the 0. And what is your radius? Your radius is not 64. It's the square root of 64. And 64 is a perfect square of what? 64 is a perfect square of 8. So that would be your center and your radius there. Now let's go the other way. So now I'm going to give you the center and the radius, and you're going to find the center radius form. So let's say our center is at -5, 3, and your radius is 2. What would this look like in your center radius form? So we're just working backwards. There, the x goes first, y goes over here. Now, whenever we go from the center radius form to the center, or vice versa, we have to switch our signs. Okay, so that's part of it. So we have to switch the signs of the center. So this one is going to be now, instead of it being a -5, this is going to be an x plus 5. And the y, instead of it being a +3, is going to be a -3. Now, this is r squared, not just r. So that's 2 squared, which is then 4. So you're going to have 4 there because that's your 2 squared. And that is your answer now in center radius form. Circles are not that difficult either, but a lot of it is new. So some of this is going to be brand new. One more, and then I'll give you a picture, and you're going to have to try and find the equation from a picture. Okay, so one more of these. I'm going to have you find the center radius form. And let's say we have a center that's at 0, -8. And a radius of 3. So again, I want this in center radius form. Now, what do I need to do? Switch my signs. If you have a 0, then there's nothing on that part. So what we have is we have an x squared. That's 0, so there's nothing with the x. Then we have a plus, and then we have a y. And what about that -8? Well, it becomes a +8. We have to square it. And on the right-hand side, this is 9. Why is it 9? Because 3 squared is what? 9. So there is your answer in center radius form. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to give you a circle, and you're going to use this circle to find the center and the radius, and we're going to write our answer in center radius form. So we're going to find now the center radius form. Okay, so let's make one point right here. Let's go up. How about 10? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so it's going to be clear up here. Okay, that's going to be up there at 10. That's -4 there. Okay, and that's going to give us a radius of 5. So then we're going to go over here. And let me see what we've got. It's going to be 5. So there's 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's going to be right there. And I'll label these ordered pairs for us here in just a moment. And same thing up 5. So here's your ordered pairs. I'm going to label them just so we have them. So this ordered pair right here, that is going to be at minus 4, 0. So there's that one. We've got an ordered pair over here, and that one's going to be at minus 9, up 5 units. This one over here is at 1, 5. And this one up here is going to be at negative 4, 10. And this is going to make a circle. Now, this is what you're given. So you're given this picture. I want you to find the center radius form of this circle. Now, we can either do it algebraically, or you can look at the picture and use the picture. I'm going to just use the picture. I think that's the easier way to do these. So the center is right in the middle. Okay, so the center, if I look at it, it's going to be where this X is. Okay, so the center is going to be right there. Now, where would that center be at? Okay, if we look at it from here, okay, it's 4 units back, so that's minus 4. And how many units up is it? 5. So now we know part of it. So we know our center is at minus 4, positive 5. Is everyone okay with how I did that? You could also find your midpoint. Okay, if you did the midpoint here of those 2 points, that would land you right there. So you can either use the midpoint formula, or you can do it graphically. So either algebraically or graphically. Now, what about the radius? Let's do this one again graphically. Does anyone know what the radius would be? 5, right? Because if I'm here, how many units do I have to go back to get to the negative 9? Well, if I'm at negative 4, right, I have to go 5 units back. 5 units up, 5 units forward, and 5 units down. So my radius would be what? My radius would be 5. Now, what does this look like in center radius form? Well, in center radius form, we switch our signs. So that's going to be x plus 4 here, y minus 5, and what's the other side going to be? 25, because that's r squared, which is 5 squared, and that is 25. So you can either do this one using the midpoint and the distance formula, if you wanted to do it that way, or you could just draw your lines and count units. Graphically is going to be the easier way, so just like I did here, just section it out, find your center, and then count the units to get your radius. And that will be your answer in center radius form. What we're going to look at next for these circles is we're going to have to complete the square. So we're going to have to learn how to complete the square. I'm going to give you 4 of these. We're going to factor these. These are perfect square trinomials. And I'm going to have you factor these. And then we're going to look for a pattern. And that should equal 225, I believe, because 15 squared, yep. That 15 squared is 225. And one more. How about we look at x squared? Let's do a plus again. How about plus? How about a good square here? How about 12x and a plus 36? Okay, so we're going to factor all of these, and these are what are called perfect square trinomials. And then we're going to look for a pattern. Notice on the ends, 25 is a perfect square, 16 is, 225 is a perfect square, and 36. These are all perfect squares. So let's see how these would factor. Well, 25 is a perfect square of what? 5. So this would factor, and you bring your sign down. This would factor into x plus 5, quantity squared. Let's try the next one. We know 16 is a perfect square of what? 4. Sign in the middle is negative. So that's going to come down as an x minus 4. 225 is also a perfect square because 225, right? If you can't see it, you can always use a calculator. 225 is a perfect square of 15. Sign in the middle is negative, so that's going to come down as an x minus 15. And then the last one, well, 36 is a perfect square of 6. Sign in the middle is positive, so that comes down as an x plus 6 there. Okay, I want you to look now at the number in the middle. And I want you to see if you can see a pattern, how all these go together. So look at them all at once. 10 and 5, 8 and 4, 30 and 15, 12 and 6. What do you notice here? 10 and 5, 8 and 4, 30 and 15, 12 and 6. How do they relate? They are what? They are half, right? Okay? Half of 10 is 5, and 5 squared is 25. Half of a negative 8 is a negative 4, and when you square a negative 4, it becomes a what? Positive 16. Half of negative 30 is a negative 15. 15 squared is 225. Half of 12 is 6. 6 squared is a 36. We're going to be using this now to fill in the missing pieces. Because in some cases, you're going to be missing parts. And we're going to have to keep track of what we're missing and add something in to make it factor. Because we want it to be a square. So we're going to complete the square here. So we'll start off with a pretty simple one. Oh, how about we use a 16x here and we'll make it negative. So this is what we've got. So I want you to complete the square. I want to make this factor. Well, I'm missing the end. So what's going to come down? Okay, we know the sign's going to be a negative. And what's half of 16? 8. Okay, so the 8 comes down. Now, what am I going to have to add in? What goes up here? What goes in this blank here? Negative 8. Again, watch the pattern. 5 squared is 25. 4 squared is 16. 15 is 225. 6 squared is 36. So what's going to go in this blank right here? 64, right? Because 8 squared is what? 64. Now, I had to add in 64 to make it factor, so I had to preserve that. Okay, that's going to make that factor, whatever you, well, sorry about that. Well, let me make sure we'll put that in later. But that's, you're going to have to keep track of that. Okay, just so we don't get confused, you're going to have to keep track of that 64. Always keep track of that. Let's try another one. How about x squared now? How about minus 14x? And how is that going to factor? What am I going to have to add in? Can someone tell me how this is going to factor here? Okay, what's going to come down here? Minus 7. And what goes in the blue box up here? 49, right? Because 7 squared is what? 49. It may not come out to be a whole number. In some cases, you may end up with a fraction. How about x squared plus 3x? Now, this one is not going to be a whole number. It's going to be a fraction. Because what is half of 3? Does 3 evenly divide by 2? No. So that's going to come down, and it's a plus. That comes down as an x plus 3 over 2, right? Okay, now, what's going to go in the box? Well, what do we do with the 7? We squared it, and we got what? 49, right? How do we square a fraction? Write it out twice and multiply. So that's 3 halves times 3 halves, which is then 9 fourths. So that's going in the box. It's 9 fourths. Let's do one more, and then we're going to be putting everything together to work with equations. We're going to have to complete the square twice to get it in center radius form. So let's do one more. How about another one that makes a fraction? How about x squared minus x? Okay, well, we know there's a 1 there. We don't always write it, but there is a negative 1. And what's half of a negative 1? Negative 1/2. What am I going to have to add in to force this to factor? What would have to be added in? Well, 1/2 times 1/2 is what? 1/4. So that's got to be added in. Now, why is it always positive? Because these, again, are negative. And what happens when you have a negative times another negative? Makes it positive. So the ends are always going to be positive. Whatever sign is here comes down with it. Now let's look at a couple of these from our textbook. And I'll pick these out of the textbook so that we get circles that have a nice center and a nice radius. So I'll just pick a couple of these from our textbook to look at. Let's look at question number 29. And this is on page 219. So page 219, question 29. We've got x squared plus y squared minus 4x plus 12y equals negative 4. So the first thing we have to do is we have to make sure that all the numbers are on the right. The x's and the y's are left on the left-hand side. So we need to make sure if we need to move things over, we'll do that. In this case, we don't need to, right? Because all the x's and the y's are on the left-hand side. That negative was on the right. We are now going to complete the square twice. We're going to complete the square in the x part. We're going to complete the square in the y part. We'll put our pieces back together, and then we'll find the center and the radius. So let's look at the x part. And that is x squared minus 4x. What would that factor into? Can someone tell me? What would come down into here? That would be an x minus what? 2. Okay? Now, make sure you keep track of what you have to add in. What did we have to add in to make it factor? 4. So put a box around it and keep track of that 4, because 2 squared is 4. Very, very important, because we are going to need this here in a moment. Next, we look at the y part. And that's y squared plus 12y. Our procedure is half and square. Just remember that pattern. Half, square. So what's half of 12? 6. So that's going to come down as a y plus 6. What am I going to have to add in now? 36, right? Because 6 squared is what? 36. Now we rewrite it. One more step and we're done. The hard part is all over. We now rewrite it. So when we rewrite this, we have an x minus 2 quantity squared plus y plus 6 quantity squared. Now the right-hand side still has the negative 4. We need to keep track of the boxes as well. What did we add in to force it to factor? What are our boxes? We added in 4, and we added in what? 36. Whatever you add to one side, you add to the other. So you just add them, and then what does that give you? Well, minus 4 and 4, those cancel, so that leaves you with this 36. Now, this is in center radius form, and we can now find our center and the radius. So what would the center be? Does anyone know? Yep, 2 and negative 6. And your radius is not 36, it's the square root of 36, which is then what? 6. So the only thing that you really need to remember is half and square. And you always keep track of everything that you're adding in, because it has to be added in at the end. Let's do another one. How about we look at one where we have to move things over? 28. If we did 29, we're now going to look at 28. And 28 has an extra step. Okay, so for this one, we have to make sure, when we work out this one, that all the x's and the y's are on the left. Everything that's just a number goes to the right. So what do we need to do with that 16? That 16 does not belong there, so that 16 needs to be moved over. So you have to make sure x's and y's are on the left. Everything else goes to the right. Now we can work with it. Now we can complete the square. So we've got x squared plus 8x. What's that going to factor into? Yep, x plus 4. Okay. And what are we going to have to add in? 16. Okay, and make sure you keep track of that. Very, very important that you keep track of that. Because that's going to have to be added back in a moment. And that was the x part. Now, what about the y part? That's y squared minus 6y. So what do? Half and square. What's half of a negative 6? Negative 3. And negative 3 squared becomes a positive what? 9. Almost done. Let's go ahead and finish this out. Put it back together. Make sure you notice it has a minus 16. So we have an x plus 4, quantity squared. We have a y minus 3, quantity squared. And that equals now minus 16. We add in 16, and we also add the 9. Because the minus 16 came from here. Almost done. Clean it up a bit. Write our answer. So that's x plus 4, quantity squared. Y minus 3, quantity squared. The 16s cancel, and that leaves you with a 9. And what is my center? Can someone tell me? Very good work. Negative 4, positive 3, and your radius, square root of 9, which is 3. Where they can become more of a challenge is when we have to divide. And you may end up with fractions. We're going to do 2 of these. And then we'll talk about things that are not circles after that. So let's look at question 33. Okay, question 33. I'm going to go ahead and move that 23 over. So I'm going to rewrite that as 9x squared plus 9y squared minus 6x plus 6y, and I'm going to move that 23 over. You always have to make sure that all the numbers are on the right, all the variables are on the left. Okay, so I move that 23 over just to save a step of writing and then writing again. So I move that over at the beginning. Okay, now this one, we're going to have to make fractions. Whether we want to or not, we're going to have to induce these fractions. We never ever want a number in front of the x squared or the y squared. They're going to be the same number. They're always the same. If these are different, this would be an ellipse. And we don't cover ellipses in this course. That's more of a calculus thing. So these are going to all be the same. So if it's 8 and 8, 9 and 9, in this case, 5 and 5, whatever it is, in this case it's 9s, you've got to divide everything by that 9. They're going to be the same. Divide everything by the 9. It has to be x squared and y squared alone. Now, that may induce fractions, and that's okay, but we will work with those fractions. So the 9's cancel, and that leaves you with an x squared plus y squared. We reduce it down, and that's going to reduce down to 3, let me write it right here, a minus 2/3 x, right? A minus 2/3 y, and the other side stays as a 23 over 9. So if there's ever a number in front, you've got to divide it out. Now we have to complete the square. The fractions are going to go away in a moment. So we don't have to worry about them, but they will go away later on. So let's look now at the x part. For the x part, I've got x squared and a minus 2/3 x. Now, how do we half a fraction? Well, you half a fraction by multiplying it by half, right? So how do we half this fraction? We take that minus 2/3, multiply it by a half. 2's can cancel, so that leaves you with a minus 1/3. So that goes here as x minus 1/3. Half the fraction. Multiply it by half, the 2's cancel, that leaves you with a minus 1/3. Now, what am I going to have to add in up here? Well, you've got a minus 1/3, and we have to square it. When I multiply those together, what does that give you? 1/9. So that's what we're going to have to add in. That's for the x part. Similar concept for the y part. It's actually exactly the same. So for the y part, we've got y squared minus 2/3 y. We half that minus 2/3, and that leaves you with the minus 1/3. We square it, and that gives you a positive 1/9. Right? It's the same, so that's why I'm not working it out again. Okay. Now, when I put all the pieces together, what am I going to have? Let's see what we've got. When I put it together, I've got an x minus 1/3 quantity squared. I've got a y minus 1/3. Wait, did I miss a sign somewhere? Yeah, the y should be plus, shouldn't it? Sorry about that. That should be plus. I knew I was making a mistake somewhere. My mistake. That should be a plus there. And that should be a plus there. Sorry about that. I just copied it down wrong. And what about the other side? Okay, the other side is a 23/9. We're going to add to that 1/9, and we're going to add to that another 9, right? Because those are my pieces. The only time these ever become a challenge is when you have these fractions. The good thing is they're all going to go together. So we're almost done. We've got x minus 1/3 quantity squared. We've got y plus 1/3 quantity squared. And what about these? These are the same. So that's 25/9. What would my center now be? Okay, we switch our sign. So that's going to be a positive 1/3, negative 1/3. And what about your radius? Radius is the square root of 25 over the square root of 9, which is then 5/3. We'll do one more of these complicated ones, and then we'll do two easier ones after that. So question 34 is another one where you're going to have to divide. And I'm going to go ahead and move that 7 over. Okay, so I went ahead, and the first thing I did was I moved that 7 over. Now, what do you notice it's in front of the x squared and the y squared? Okay, both of these have the same number, and that's a 4. So what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to divide everything by what? 4. We have no choice but to do that. Okay, So we're going to divide everything by a 4 there. Now, when we divide it all by 4, that leaves us then with an x squared plus a y squared. And then we've got a plus x, a minus y, and that equals 7/4. So what you need to first do is get rid of the numbers in front. They're always going to be the same. So 3's and 3's, 4's and 4's, 6's and 6's, whatever it might be. Now we look at the x part. And we've got x squared plus x. And this one's actually a little bit easier. So what's half of 1? 1/2. So that comes down as an x plus a half. And what are we going to have to add in? A half times a half, which is 1/4. So 1/4 has to be added in. Repeat the process for the y part. Y squared minus y. What's half of a minus 1? Minus 1/2. What are we going to have to add in to force it to factor? Because that's going to be minus a half. Minus a half makes it 1/4. So 1/4 is added in. Is everyone all right with that so far? Right? Half and square. That's it. That's all you have to remember. Half and square. Put it all back together, and we're done. So let's put this back together. We've got x plus 1/2 x, or sorry, x plus 1/2 quantity squared. Let me say it right here. We've got y minus 1/2 quantity squared. Now we had a 7/4. We've got to add in another 4th and another 4th, right, from the two pieces. That gives you 9/4. Okay, what's my center going to be? Can anyone tell me what the center will be? Okay. Center will be a negative 1/2, positive 1/2, right? Okay, what about the radius? Yep. Radius is going to be 3/2 because that's the square root of 9 over the square root of 4, and that's a 3/2. So now you have your center, and you've got your radius. Let's do 2 more, and the next 2 are not going to be circles. And we're going to talk about why these are not circles. So question 35. So question 35. I'm going to go ahead and begin by moving that 14 over. So that 14 is going to get moved over. I just don't want to have to write it and write it again. So always make sure that the x and the y's are on the left. Everything else is to the right. So that's what we've got. Okay. And this is on page 219 again. Half and square. This was actually very easy. What's going to come down? X what? Okay, half of 2 is a 1, so that adds on a 1. What's going to have to be added in? 1 squared is a 1. What about the y part? On the y part, we have y squared minus 6y. What's half of a negative 6? Okay, so that's y minus 3. What do I have to add in to force it to factor? 3 squared is a 9. Now, this one is not going to be a circle. And we're going to talk about why this is not a circle in just a second. So let's try to put it all back together. So I've got x plus 1 quantity squared. I've got y minus 3 quantity squared. And we have a minus 14. We've got to add 1. We've got to add 9. That makes it a minus 4. Now, why is this one not going to be a circle? Does anyone know why? Anyone got any idea on why this would not be a circle? Well, what happens when I try to take the square root of that negative 4? If I try to take the square root of that negative 4, what's going to happen there? Right, if I take the square root of that negative 4, it becomes a positive 4, doesn't it? So, or sorry, let me say it right. When I take the square root of that negative 4, it becomes a 2i, right? It comes out as a positive 2i. We can't have an imaginary radius. So this one is going to be non-existent. Go ahead and pass up the sign-in sheet. Don't forget. This one's going to be non-existent, and here's why. It has a center, which that would be minus 1, 3, but the radius gives us the problem. The radius is the square root of a minus 4, but that, remember from 1.3, that comes out as a 2i. And you can never have an imaginary radius, so this can never be imaginary. And so this graph is non-existent. That's what I want for the answer. The graph is non-existent. And the reason why it's non-existent is because when you take the square root of a negative number, you end up with an imaginary. And if you have an imaginary number, we can't graph that. So that means the graph does not exist at all. It's not a circle. One more, and this will be our last question. This one is also not a circle. This one's going to be a point. 37. Let's look at question 37. I'm again going to move that 18 over. So we've got x squared plus y squared. We have a minus 6x, a minus 6y, and I'm going to move that 18 over. Now we complete the square on the x part and the y part. And we've got x squared minus 6x. Well, half of a negative 6 is a negative 3. And 3 squared is a 9. Make sure we add that in. The y part is going to be done the exact same way. And it's y squared minus 6y. Half of that is a y minus 3. And 3 squared again is a 9. Now, what's different about this one? Well, when I put it all together, what's going to happen? It's all going to go to 0, won't it? Because on this one, we've got x minus 3 quantity squared. We've got a y minus 3 quantity squared. We have a minus 18 already on the right. We're going to add 9 and add another 9, and that then makes it what? 0. So what would the center here be? Switching the signs would be 3, 3. And what about the radius? Radius is 0, right? Because square root of 0 is 0. Now, what happens if your radius is 0? That's not a circle, right? That's going to be a point. So what would this be? Because radius is 0. Okay, so this is a point. And what would the point be? Point is 3, 3. So it's not a circle anymore. It's the point 3, 3. Why is it a point? Because your radius is 0. Now, what's our homework? Well, your homework is 2.1. You can do them all. And 2.2. You should be able to do them all. So that is going to be your homework. Also, before you leave, make sure